Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel where the gnomes live. This is Sharon Oyella, and today I'm going to show you how I made these tiny mushrooms. I made these mushrooms for my gnome home, and this gnome home is actually sitting inside my craft room, so it's not exposed to weather. If you want to make the same type of mushrooms for an outdoor display, then you would have to seal them with an exterior sealer. I used a Sculpey 3 oven baked clay for the mushrooms. For the stem, I used a 20 gauge florist wire. It comes in packages like this, and I got mine at Walmart. I've also seen them in the dollar store. I used pliers to cut the wire. I used a little tool like this to sculpt the end of my mushroom underneath the cap. You can also use a butter knife, or the end of a spoon would work. A paintbrush, of course. I used also a razor blade to cut my clay with, but you can also use a butter knife. For colors, I used an antique white, a tan, and a burnt umber. These are all craft acrylic paints that I found in the dollar store. I also used a clear nail polish. It has a shine to it, which makes the mushrooms come to life. You don't have to use the same thing I'm using. You can use any type of sealer to paint over top. Alright, my friends, we're about to get started. Before we do, I did not cut any gills in to these mushrooms because they're sitting so low to the ground that you can't see underneath them anyway. If you wanted to add gills, you could easily do that with an X-Acto knife and just cut little gills in before you bake them. So I usually make a small batch like this, and I make a variety of different sizes, as you can see. So all I do to get the cap is just make a small ball. Take a little chunk, and you can get the shape of the cap a couple different ways. This is very soft clay, so I just found if I put it on the end of my thumb and just use my other thumb in my finger and just push down, kind of pulling the sides down towards my thumb, then that works just fine. If that doesn't work, if you have a harder clay, then just pinch the edges around. We're just making a small disc with a little bit of a peak. And what I've done with some of them is put in a little imperfection, just like you see on real mushrooms. Looks like a little Pac-Man mouth there. Most of them I just leave straight, clean edges. Then I take a pencil, and I'm just going to poke a hole right in the center. And that's it. Now I haven't made the cap and stem together yet. I've done a couple different batches. I've always bake the caps, and then I make the stems, and then I bake them again. So let's do it that way. So I'll pop these in, and then we'll come back and do the stems. Making the stems now. You can do this a couple of different ways. You can make the wire longer than the actual stem itself. That way you can use the wire to hang on to while you paint, or you can even stick it into styrofoam when you're done a bunch of your mushrooms, and then just paint them that way. I find it just as quick and easy just to paint them as is without making that wire longer. So I'll leave it up to you how you want to do it. So I'll just take a little piece of the clay, and I'm going to flatten it out with my fingers. You can roll it, but this is just quick and easy to do it this way. So I just make a little flat pancake, and now I'm just going to take a section out of the middle. And the wider you make the strip, the thicker your stem is going to be. So I'm just going to taper that off a little bit more. Then I put my wire right in the center, and I just tap it inside the clay just a little bit, and then I roll the sides over onto the wire. And then gently roll. You want to roll gently, otherwise the wire just separates from the clay. And we're just rolling just to smooth out the stem. And what I did on some of my other ones that I baked, after they came out of the oven, I actually bent them just slightly. If you bend them too much, they will break. You can do that before you stick them in, of course. If you want to bend them a lot, you want to do that while the clay is unbaked, because after it's baked, if you bend them a little bit more than this, then they'll start cracking. So it's up to you. I just leave them pretty much straight looking. Maybe some of them have a slight curve, but that's about it. We're going to start putting the stems and the caps together, but before we do that, I just want to point out one little thing that I found out. So my first couple of batches that I made, I used a glass pan to bake them with, and I'm using a toaster oven. And all of the mushrooms that I have sitting in the gnome home right now, none of them burnt. I baked them at 250 degrees for 15 minutes. And that was even tiny ones, and none of them even turned brown, and they baked fine. And for this video here, I decided to use my little cookie sheet, same temperature and same length of time, and you can see that they burnt. So this is not a big deal for me. I don't mind that at all because I'm going to be painting these anyway, and we won't be seeing any of this burnt stuff on the mushrooms, but just keep that in mind. If you're going to be using a cookie sheet, you'll probably want to decrease the amount of time that you bake them at, and it's probably because they're so tiny. So now we're going to put our stems into our caps, and when we do that, we need a little tool to push the clay around in there, and I have a little tool here. A butter knife or the end of a spoon works just as well. And just push that clay into that hole. If you need to, you can add a little bit of extra clay around there. Just make a little string of it, and you can lay it in there and then push that in. I find just pushing a little bit of that clay in from the wire itself works just fine. But if you're worried about it, you can do it this way. And then I'll bake them again for about 12 minutes. My mushrooms are cool. They came out about 15 minutes ago, I'd say. And I baked them for 12 minutes at 250 degrees in a glass pan with the stems attached. And I'm just putting that tan color on. I'm going to let this dry, and then I'm going to come back and show you how I do the top coat with the cream color. So I'm doing underneath the cap, top of the cap, and the entire stem. So the tan color is all dry now, and I'm ready to put on the lighter color, and I'm using Antique White. It's like a cream. And I have water and my little bit of paint there, and this is going to get a little bit messy, so I put down something to protect my tabletop. So we're just going to dip the tip of the brush into the paint, just a little tiny bit, and then dip into the water, watered down paint. Let's see how it sprays. Gets very messy. Because the lighting's so terrible, you can't really see it, but in person you can see. The reason why I do the watered down cream colored paint on top is so you still get some of that tan color underneath, and you can even take your finger and just rub some of it off after you've painted it on, and it gives a really nice effect when it's all done. So just play around with that look. So once that watered down paint is dry, now we can do the very edges, and I use burnt umber, and I'm going to use very, very little of that burnt umber. I'm going to dip my brush in there. This is a stiffer brush. Get the excess off, and just pull up, and do it quickly. A little bit of an effect around the edge. In some parts I go a little bit higher than other parts. The final step that we do to make them come to life is add the clear coat, and that just changes everything about their looks. You can add this clear coat after you've already attached these to your grounds or your log or whatever you're attaching them to, or you can do it now. It doesn't matter. I normally do it after I've got them put in place on the gnome home, but I can do it here. This dries fairly quickly. It's just a clear nail polish. Just give it a second. Alright, so the mushrooms ended up, I just pushed those in, and most of them are just held in that way. I did use some hot glue, where is it, on this little bunch here. I just dropped in some hot glue right through here, and then I shoved moss down just to kind of keep them in a clump like that. You can use tacky glue as well. Alright, my friends, that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you had fun. I hope you got yourself some little mushrooms made. And if you did make some of these mushrooms, I'd sure love to see them. Post pictures on my Facebook page, Where the Gnomes Live. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you super soon.